It's good to be here. It's good to be together. It's always so wonderful. There's lots of people say it, but they say that these few steps are the longest. But oh my goodness, they were the shortest for me today. I was so excited to be here again and to be speaking to you all. Except it's very strange. It's strange how quickly we learn things, because in the back of my mind, there's just this thought the whole time: don't forget the people online. Don't forget the people online. But we're not online right now. It's strange how quickly we adapt. But we're going through this series right now called The Power of Together. And it's about relationship, and it's about how we are stronger together. And we're looking at really how people were made to be in relationship. Not necessarily a romantic relationship, but just to be with other people, and how we are stronger like that. Originally, we were built, we were made, we were created to be in relationship with God. That is like the default position of humanity, is in relationship with God. And then God looked and He said, it's not good for man to be alone. We must have people. We are relational beings. And we have all these amazing examples from the Bible of people who show us that it's really so much better to be in relationship, that we are so much stronger when we are together. If we look at David and Jonathan, or even Jesus and His disciples, Jesus often calls his inner group to come with Him when he must rest or when He must pray. And Moses and Aaron, there are so many examples of really why we need other people. We can't be alone. And I think it's so crucial in this time when a lot of us maybe are feeling quite isolated and feeling that we are quite alone from other people. It's good to remember that together doesn't mean just physically together, but you can be together in your spirit. David and Jonathan, for example, for a long time were not together. Saul was chasing David all across Israel, but Jonathan and David are still together. I mean, we and God are always together. The relationship that we need, the one that we need, we always have. We are not. He is not far from us. He is right here. He is Emmanuel, God with us all the time. So no matter how long it's been since I've seen my friends, God is with me all the time. I'm never alone. And today we're looking at Joseph from the Old Testament and his wife Asenath. I told someone yesterday that I was preaching about Joseph and his wife Asenath, and they said, I always thought Joseph's wife was called Mary. But this is Joseph from the Old Testament, back in Egypt. And first off, before we start, let me get my Bible out. I just want to mention that Asenath is only mentioned 3 times in the Bible, in 3 verses. But there is a wealth, so much Jewish history and tradition that speaks of her and Joseph, that speaks of their relationship, and really holds it in high regard. It's a wonderful story that is told, and we'll see why now. But what we're going to look at is how Joseph, with this togetherness, with this being stronger, how he really flourished, how he really did excellently, and the blessings and providence of God that went with him, and that we can see in the story of Joseph and Asenath. So just quickly some background. Joseph was a carpenter who went to Bethlehem. Joseph was the son of Jacob by Jacob's second wife, Rachel. And he was his father's favorite, and he knew it. He knew that he was his father's favorite. And it made his brothers hate him because he became quite arrogant, to the point that they beat and sold him. He was a slave in Egypt, where he attracted the eye of his master's wife, but he refused her, and she had him thrown in jail. Then while he was in jail, he interpreted some dreams. And later on, when Pharaoh was struggling with some dreams, Joseph was called up to interpret those dreams. And that's where we start. Genesis 41, verse 25 to 57. So Genesis 41, verse 25 to 57. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years." These are the fat cows and the skinny ears of wheat, and the fat ears of wheat that Pharaoh saw in his dreams. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears of grain, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers of the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. Verse 36. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you." Verse 41. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in his 2nd chariot. And they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphanath-Paneah. And he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. And he gathered up all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and put the food in the cities. He put in every city the food from the fields around it. And Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Verse 50. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph, what he says to you, do." So when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe over all the earth. It's truly an amazing story. It is a long passage, but it's wonderful and wonderful and wonderful. And there's so much that is beautiful in this story, so I have to pick out only a few things, unfortunately. And firstly, I'd like to talk about Asenath. Asenath is the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, who became the fathers of 2 of the tribes of Israel. And according to the Jewish histories and traditions, Asenath, let me just double check that quickly. Nath, not Wrath. I made a spelling mistake. Asenath. Was, according to the Jewish histories, Asenath was a beautiful Egyptian priestess, and she was much sought after in the land of Egypt. And she was the daughter of a very, very influential Egyptian priest. And she's offered to Joseph in marriage, but she doesn't initially want to marry him. She doesn't worship God, and so she sees Joseph, and she's not really, or she hears of Joseph, and she's not really interested. And Joseph likewise isn't interested in her. this is not a godly woman. He doesn't want to marry her. But then they meet, and she sees that the Spirit of God is in Joseph. And he prays for her. He prays over her. And God works an amazing transformation in her life. And she's completely renewed. She turns her life around, and she starts to worship God to the point where she is the mother of 2 tribes of Israel. And she happily marries Joseph. And it's just this this big up Egyptian priestess. And she sees the power of God in Joseph, who is 30 years old. 30 years old only. Reinu, how old are you? 33. Younger than Reinu. And he leads, no offense, Reinu, but he leads all of Egypt. And he marries this beautiful woman, and this powerful woman, and the Spirit of God is so evident in him that she is transformed completely. Completely. And Joseph accomplished all of these truly amazing things through God's blessing and providence in his life, and while preparing for this famine. And we can see how God works in Joseph's life and how God uses Joseph to accomplish his plans. And the first thing that we see, and we see it in Asenath, is that Joseph found favor amongst foreigners. People who weren't Jewish people. Well, not that Jewish people existed yet at this time, but people who didn't worship God, people who didn't worship Yahweh, saw God in Joseph. Pharaoh says, we need to find someone in whom the Spirit of God is to lead these people. That is the person that we need. This is a man who is worshipped as a god in his own kingdom. That's not really, that's a different level of idolatry, even, to be the object of idolatry. And he recognizes the power of God. He recognizes the power of God in Joseph, and he says, that's what we need. That's what we need over our people. He steps back, he himself steps back and says, no, Joseph must do these things, because Joseph's God will allow him to save my land. It's amazing, it's outstanding. And we see that God put Joseph almost in the way of these foreign people, and he rose from being a lowly slave to being the second most powerful person in all of Egypt by the age of 30. And he spent many years in jail during that time. It's an astronomical rise. It's a big promotion. He served under powerful people, and the presence of God in him was so abundant and so clear that he almost couldn't help but rise. It's not because he worked so very hard and he had a 10-step plan, but because the Spirit of God was in him. These foreign people who didn't worship God saw him and said, wow, that's amazing. We need that guy. we should hire him. 17 when he arrived. In 13 years, he went from being a slave to being a high-up servant to being in jail again to being, that's like, it's quite big rises and falls, but he ends up right at the top. And the Spirit of God is so abundant in him, and he finds so much favor that Pharaoh gives him, a foreigner who used to be a slave. He's not an Egyptian. And Pharaoh gives him this most sought-after, powerful woman as his wife. It's like he comes in completely from the outside, and Pharaoh goes, yes, that one. Like, in the old days, and it's very incorrect, but women were often seen as a resource. If you had a beautiful daughter or a powerful daughter, it's a resource. You can gain influence. You can make good alliances. And Pharaoh values Joseph so much. Joseph finds so much favor with Pharaoh that there's nothing really for Pharaoh to gain by giving Joseph this wonderful wife. There's no gain on Pharaoh's side. But because Joseph found so much favor, Pharaoh gives him this wife. And although we don't know much about Asenath from the Bible, we know that she was an influential woman. And we can safely say that having an Egyptian wife who was raised there, who is influential, who is powerful, who is beautiful, because that's always a bonus, Um, having this influential and powerful wife can only have helped Joseph. Because no matter how high he rose, there would always be those people who were saying, but wasn't that guy a slave? He's from some little-known family of 70 people. He's not from any great nation. But now he has this powerful, influential wife, and it's almost like a foot in the door. It almost lends him legitimacy when he speaks. And this can only have increased his popularity and helped him to carry out his plans. And truly, his plans were amazing. I don't know, Raina, if you've got that picture of the silo. But do yourself a favor and go look on YouTube at Joseph's grain silos. And they are these massive and wonderful things. And they were so complex that, like, you pour the grain in here and then it runs in there, and you take the grain out from the bottom so that you always take the old grain and not the new grain. It's these wonderful, massive projects. And Joseph, who never had any engineering training, he never had any kind of mathematical training or schooling or anything, but he caused these to be built. This is truly outstanding and marvelous things that he did. And he saved so many people. The favor that God allowed him to find amongst foreigners saved the world, basically. Saved so many nations who came to Egypt desperately in need of food, and it saved Israel. It saved the small little family that would eventually be this mighty nation of Israel. And if I may, for a moment, just interrupt myself, there's an important lesson here, and it's that once the drought had hit, once the famine hit, it was too late to start building. It was too late for the other nations. They suddenly were caught off guard, and they couldn't prepare because the famine was already there. You can't save 1/5 of your harvest if your harvest is already too little. And the same as with Noah, once the rain started, it's too late to start building an ark. And people laughed at Noah, as I'm sure they laughed at Joseph, because the only evidence, I mean, there were years of plenty. The only evidence that they had was this dream that he interpreted. And I'm sure they thought that, look at Joseph, he's going to the beach on a sunny day, and he's spending his whole time setting up umbrellas for in case it rains. Except that when the famine came, they survived. Egypt survived, Israel survived, and all those other nations who didn't prepare survived because of Joseph's preparations. And if I just think of where we are now, no one was prepared for COVID. No one was prepared for these things that we are facing now. And even now, so many people, so many institutions and countries are still unprepared. They still are not ready. And you'd think by now they would have figured something out. But that's the lesson, and it's not really related to the rest of what I said, but it just jumped out at me and it felt really important to me, is that once the disaster hits, it's too late. Plant, grow, and harvest while there is plenty, while the sun shines. And it's not, I don't believe that it's setting up umbrellas at the beach on a sunny day. I think it's more like taking a rain jacket when you go camping. It's more like, it's not, I don't mean that while we have plenty, we should starve ourselves and not see anyone for in case it comes out again, but not to get caught up in where we are, not to get caught up in, oh, things are so good, they will never be bad again. That was just a little aside. Back to finding favor. The message here is not that everything will miraculously go well. It's not that your path will be opened up before you and it will be clean sailing all the way down, because I think if we look, especially in the New Testament and very much in the Old Testament, that's never been the case. It's never been easygoing for anyone who followed God. It's not a call to soap and hot bubble baths. It's a call to difficulty. But when God sets a task, He helps. When God sets you a task, He helps you to get there. Joseph on his own, no matter how great of a man he was, wouldn't have been able to accomplish what he did. But with God on his side, he could. And so don't be daunted by the dreams you have. Don't be daunted by the task that God seems to set you, because God knows how He will bring them about. Secondly, in the story of Joseph and Asenath, we see that God used foreigners to fulfill his plans. In the same way that he put Joseph into the lives of foreigners, he also put foreigners into the life of Joseph. He put people like Asenath, Joseph's wife. He put Pharaoh, Potiphar, the cupbearer in jail. He put all these foreigners into Joseph's life to use them to further God's plan. He used these foreigners, these outsiders, to help Joseph, to help God's plan. And even Egypt, even the country of Egypt, this nation that would become a swear word to Israelites, this nation that Israelites would use to scare children, the big baddie, he even used that nation to help his plan, to save Israel. And he used the slave traders who bought Joseph and took him to Egypt. He used them to put Joseph into a position where he could save the world. And that is such a good thing for us. It's so important and so wonderful for us that God uses foreigners, because unless you can trace yourself back to one of those 12 tribes of Israel, I have news for us, but we are foreigners. We are Gentiles. And so the fact that God uses Gentiles, I'm happy. I'm really excited. Thank you so much, Jesus. And God uses us, but the point is not only that he uses foreigners, but he uses those that we least expect. He uses those that we don't expect him to use. If we think, who will God use? We think the high and mighty, the strong, they are representing God. They must be glorious in like the white robes or something. But he uses tax collectors and sinners. He uses ordinary people, even less than ordinary people. He uses the downtrodden. He uses the broken. He uses the outcast, the slave, the exile, prostitutes, sinners, tax collectors. He uses the voiceless. He uses those who appear to us not to be worthy of being used. Even in the family line of Jesus, we see Rahab, a prostitute. We see Ruth, a Moabite. And what a blessing that is for us. How absolutely extraordinary that God uses those who are not worthy to be used, because if he only had to use the worthy, then I don't think a single person in this poor fallen world would ever be used. We'd all be sitting at home twiddling our thumbs, because who's God going to use if he can only use the worthy? And that's what I think. It's our perception of what is worthy is so completely different from what it is. Because what makes us worthy in his eyes is that he made us. I made you to do this thing, therefore you are the thing to do this thing. Imagine a silo. Joseph creates his silo, and the silo says, actually, Joseph, I think I'm not worthy to be a silo. How ridiculous. You're made to be a silo. We were made to be with God. We were made to be in relationship with him. And that's so amazing to us. And we see it when God uses all these foreigners in the story of Joseph. God uses who he wants, not who we think he should want. And not even who we want him to use. And I think that's wonderful, and I think that's amazing. My last point is that God accomplishes things in mysterious and unexpected ways. When you start reading the whole Bible, we look back at it. I mean, these days, most people know most of the stories of the Bible, or just generally kind of. And so in our minds, they're kind of already there. But if you're reading this for the first time, this is the greatest mystery thriller. Every second sentence is just a left field. That was right, but left field. Everything is just twists and turns and unexpected. Who would have thought this arrogant young man gets beaten and sold into slavery? There is no indication whatsoever that this man is going to rise to be the second man in Egypt and thereby save Israel and all the nations. It's out of the blue. It doesn't make sense. And It's so wonderful. Imagine being able to read the Bible with fresh eyes, never having heard any of it before. I think you'd be so shocked. What happened now? Oh my goodness, Gideon only has 3 men now, 300 men. What's going to happen? And then he wins. Moses, they're stuck in front of the sea. What are they going to do? Oh, the sea parts. It's God does things in unexpected and mysterious ways. And that is wonderful. I don't think that anyone can predict that selling Joseph, and certainly his brothers couldn't do it, that selling Joseph into slavery was part of God's plan to save the nation of Egypt from famine. And when Joseph gets arrested because of Potiphar's wife, there's no indication that that even is also a step in the plan. You'd think that that's a way down, but it's just moving him onto a slightly different path, up. It's crazy and it's exciting and it's wonderful because God's plan is so far beyond us. We can't comprehend it. We can't begin to see all the little things and all the way that they are working. And I'm sure Joseph couldn't see it either. But something that's really amazing in this story is the difference between Joseph's perception of his dream that he had and the way that it actually turns out. Earlier, before his brothers had sold him, Joseph had 2 dreams where his brothers bowed down to him, where his family bowed down to him. And it made him quite prideful and quite arrogant, and his brothers hated him for it. And it's good to remember that Joseph comes from an incredibly broken family background. His father, Jacob, wanted to marry Rachel. And so he worked very hard and then was tricked into marrying Leah. And then he married Rachel afterwards, but then Rachel struggled to have children. So we've got all this insecurity and tension going on because Leah knows that Jacob never wanted her. I mean, very clearly, how can you ever be happy knowing that you tricked yourself into this marriage? And Rachel knows that Jacob wants children. Even though he wanted her first, he also wants children, and Leah's giving him children. And into this mix, throw a few more servants with whom Jacob is having children, and throw a bunch of arrogant and prideful sons who are incredibly competitive to the point that they would strongly consider murdering their brother. That's a pretty extreme thing to do. I mean, I've fought with my brother a few times, but I've never thought of, beating him and throwing him in a well. This is not a healthy environment. There's insecurity, there's jealousy, there's just all around not wonderfulness in this family situation. And we see this in Joseph. He's so proud because he knows, but proud in a bad way. He's prideful because he knows that he is the son of the wife that Jacob wanted. Joseph is all of Leah's sons. Joseph didn't want those sons. Jacob. Jacob wanted Rachel's sons. And so Joseph is the first son, if we think about it that way, that Jacob wanted. Wow, these J names are confusing me. And so Joseph comes all lordly to his brothers. He's proud, he's puffed up, and he says, "You guys are going to bow down to me." Look at that. I wonder who is the superior son here. It's me. And they are furious. They are so angry. And they eventually sell him, and he goes through slavery, and he goes through prison, and he goes through all these hardships, and being in a completely different land, being a foreigner in a land. And his dream is fulfilled eventually, and his brothers do come and bow down to him. But when they do, there's no arrogance. There's no lording it over them. It's not a case of them. There's no victory for Joseph in that moment. He weeps. And he's reunited with his brothers, and it's joyful and it's wonderful. And it's so different from how he perceived that it would go. It's so different from how he expected it to happen. But if we look at the dream, it's still exactly the dream. They still bow down to him. The difference is how he responds to it. And all of what he went through up until then brought him to that reaction. All the the hardship that he went through, all the times when he just really had to rely on God because God was all that he had. Now, later on in his life, when he's building these silos, he has Asenath with him. He has the favor of Pharaoh. He has later on his family with him. But then at that time, all that he had, the only relationship that he had was God. And he was strong for it. He could go through all those things because he had the relationship of God with him. He had the favor and the strength of God on his side. And I think it's so very important for us to remember, especially now in this time, that just because we think that God will carry things out in a certain way doesn't mean that he will do them in that way. He will do it his way. He is going to do the things his way. If we look at the disciples, they did not understand at all what Jesus was going to do. And they were confused and they were scared when they saw that he had died. But God was doing it in the right way. God was fulfilling his promises in the way that he always intended them. And it's us, and it's the disciples, and it's Joseph who misinterprets them, who decide that this is the way it's going to be. Israel decided there's a warrior king going to come. He's going to be the Messiah. He's going to overthrow Rome. It's going to be big and strong, and it's going to be wonderful. And that's not what happened. But if we look, that's not what God said was going to happen. He never said this man's going to come in swinging a sword and he's going to chase Rome out. God fulfills his promises in his way, in the way that he intends. And it's so interesting because this little story, this short little bit, this unexpected story of brokenness and pride and jealousy and famine and foreigners and favor, this little story is all a small part of a larger plan to fulfill a covenant made to Abraham, to establish the nation of Israel. Because through this story, Israel is saved, and Israel ends up in Egypt. And although it ends up very badly for them in Egypt, for a long time, they're protected by being in Egypt. And they can grow, and they can expand to the point where Moses leads them out. And that plan, the plan of Abraham's covenant, is part of a larger plan to fulfill a covenant made in the beginning, at the fall, to reconcile us. And that itself is part of a larger plan to reconcile the whole world to God. It's part of a plan to put us back to the way that things were. Everything in the Bible is so unexpected. But then it's almost like we're looking at this one story, and then we zoom out, and it all fits together. And we zoom out, and it all fits together. And we zoom out, and it still fits together. But we haven't even seen the whole picture yet. And so we're in this time now, in this unexpected time, in this really unpleasant time. And one thing that gives me hope is the fact that this is not out of the plan. We haven't gone off the rails of the plan. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to come from this. But similarly, Joseph didn't know what was going to come from him being sold into slavery. No one, even his brothers, even the ones doing the evil deed, didn't know that actually they were doing good. Actually, in the long run, God would make this thing that they did good. And I think that's hope to hold on to. To know that one day, the same way Egypt the world had 7 years of famine. 7 hard and difficult years where there was no bread except in Egypt. And I would really miss the bread. Even that, look at it now, it's good. It's good because it cemented Israel's place in Egypt. It's good because it cemented their favor in Egypt for a long time so that they could grow strong. And so in what way, when the future looks back at this, will they say, wow, actually that was good, even though they couldn't see it? It's bigger and it's bolder and it's more complex than we could imagine, God's plans. And all the way through this plan, all the way through this Bible, we are together. Like Joseph, we are together with those around us. We're together with the Asenaths and the Pharaohs and the families of our own lives. And like Asenath and like Pharaoh and like Joseph, we end up together with God. Even Pharaoh recognizes the power of God. And God's favor and blessing go before us like they did with Joseph. Even in this time, even now, God's favor and blessing go with us. Not to make the path easy, but to make it accomplishable. To bring about the fulfillment of His plan. And I would like to pray. Father, thank you that you never forsake us. Thank you that always, always, always you are Emmanuel, that you are with us. That we know that the thing we were made to be is accomplished, that we are in relationship with you. And Father, I pray that we will hold on to that we'll keep sight of that, Father, that we will bring our end, that we will pursue relationship with you, the same way that you pursue relationship with us. Father, thank you for the stories in the Bible. Thank you for the examples, the wonderful things that we see. Stories of favor and blessing, Father. Stories of people doing amazing things for you, in your name and for your plan. And Father, I pray that we will find encouragement from them, that in this difficult time we will know that we are not alone. That people have gone through things not exactly like this, but like this before. And through and in you, they have come out the other side. Father, I pray as we go forward that we will remember that we are made to be together, that we are made to be with you and that we are made to be with others, Father. Thank you, Father, for loving us always. Amen. Amen. Peter's going to do communion.
Thanks so much, Raina. Vickers, Raina, Vickers. It's like Joseph and Jacob. And just a great reminder. Just three things really come to my heart. And that is, the favor that God has with foreigners. And, I just thought while you were talking that some of us might find ourselves with foreigners, but God's favor is there, even if we're with foreigners. And the second thing is just in terms of storehouses. And just the absolute, if you can just go back and Google those storehouses, they are phenomenal. Engineering at its best. But that we prepare, in the time of famine, in the time of harvest for the time of famine. And, that time of famine is upon us. And hopefully we have prepared well enough to survive. And then the third part for me, and Vickers was so profound in terms of mystery and the mysterious ways in which God works. And, God works sometimes despite us. You don't understand things at the moment, but He's at work. So thank you for that. And I'm sure there were other things that you gleaned.